I showed up unannounced at my wife's office on a gray Tuesday morning, carrying the same thermos of coffee she used to love when we were young, and within 60 seconds, my 34-year marriage stopped making sense. "I'm here to see Rebecca Carter," I told the security guard with a smile. "I'm her husband." The guard stared at me, then laughed as if I had just told him the funniest joke of the week. "Impossible, sir," he said. "Her husband left 5 minutes ago." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I beg your pardon?" I asked. The guard pointed toward the revolving doors. "Tall guy, dark suit, comes here all the time. Everyone knows him. Everyone knows him." Those 4 words hit harder than anything I could remember hearing in years. My wife was the CEO of a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and somehow, in her world, another man seemed to be living my life. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd like to ask something small. If this story speaks to your heart, or if it truly resonates with you, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Leave your city, your country, and even your local time in the comments below. I read every one of them. My name is Michael Carter. I'm 70 years old, and this is the story of the day I discovered that the person I trusted most had been hiding something so enormous that it changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Stay with me until the end, because the lesson I learned came at a painful price, and now let me tell you where it all began. Rebecca and I had built a life together in San Francisco. At least, that's what I believed. For years, I told myself her long hours were the price of success. Board meetings, investor dinners, flights to New York, emergency calls at midnight. "I'm doing this for us, Mike," she would always say. And I always nodded. I always believed her. That morning, I had decided to surprise her. No special occasion, no anniversary. I simply missed my wife. But standing in that marble lobby beneath the company logo, I suddenly felt like a stranger. "Maybe there's been some confusion," I said carefully. The guard shrugged. "Maybe, but I see him every week." Every week. My hands tightened around the thermos. Then something caught my eye. Mounted beside the executive elevator was a framed photograph from a recent company gala. Rebecca stood smiling in the center. Beside her was the same man the guard had described. And beneath the photo was a caption that made my stomach turn cold. The caption didn't identify him as a colleague. It didn't identify him as an investor. It identified him as family. And in that moment, I realized there was a truth hidden somewhere inside my wife's carefully constructed world, a truth nobody expected me to uncover. I stood there staring at that photograph for what felt like an hour, although it could not have been more than a few seconds. The smiling faces, the expensive ballroom, the elegant black suits, all of it seemed perfectly normal except for one detail. The man standing beside Rebecca looked comfortable, not like an employee, not like a client, not even like a close friend. He looked like he belonged there. I quietly thanked the guard and walked back outside. The cold San Francisco air hit my face as I crossed Market Street and headed toward the small coffee shop where Rebecca and I used to spend Saturday mornings before her career consumed every corner of our lives. I sat by the window and watched people hurry past. For the first time in years, I found myself drifting back through the decades, searching for the moment everything began to change. Rebecca and I met when we were both in our 20s. She was ambitious even then. I loved that about her. While other people talked about dreams, she made plans. While other people complained, she worked. We built our life from the ground up. A small apartment, 2 used cars, long workdays, late dinners, big hopes. When our son Daniel was born, I remember holding him in the hospital and whispering, "Your mother is going to do incredible things." Rebecca smiled and squeezed my hand. "Not without you," she said. Back then, I believed every word. Years passed. Her career grew. Mine remained steady. I never minded. Somebody had to be home for soccer practice, school projects, science fairs, and doctor appointments. "Dad will take care of it," became the answer to almost everything. I packed lunches. I attended parent meetings. I stayed awake helping Daniel finish history assignments at midnight. Rebecca often missed those moments. There was always another meeting, another flight, another investor presentation. "I am sorry, Michael," she would tell me while rushing through the front door with a suitcase in her hand. "I will make it up next weekend." Sometimes she did. Sometimes she did not. The strange thing was that I never felt resentful. I was proud of her. At least I thought I was. Looking back, there were small moments I ignored. tiny cracks hidden beneath a polished surface. At Daniel's college graduation, one of Rebecca's colleagues approached me and extended his hand. "You must be Rebecca's father," he said. I laughed awkwardly. "Actually, I am her husband." The man turned pale immediately. "Oh, of course. I am sorry." At the time, I dismissed it as an innocent mistake. Now I was not so sure. Then there was the charity gala 3 years earlier. Rebecca had insisted I stay home because she said attendance was limited. 2 weeks later, I saw photos online. Hundreds of guests had attended. When I asked about it, she smiled. The organizers changed the rules at the last minute. It was a mess. I accepted the explanation without another question. Sitting alone in that coffee shop, memory after memory began lining up like puzzle pieces. Each one seemed harmless on its own. Together, they formed a picture I did not want to see. My phone suddenly buzzed on the table. The screen displayed Daniel's name. I answered immediately. "Hey, son." There was a pause. "Dad, this is going to sound strange," he said. "Have you ever met someone named Andrew?" My stomach tightened. "Why are you asking?" Another silence followed. Then Daniel said something that made my heart sink. "Because I found that name in Mom's emergency contact file years ago, and every time I asked about it, she changed the subject." I left the coffee shop with a sense of both dread and determination. The city moved around me, oblivious to the private storm I carried, yet something had shifted. For the first time, I did not follow the old script of silence and patience. I did not shrug off the unease. Instead, I allowed myself to notice, to analyze, and to act. I called my old friend and accountant, Robert, whose office was tucked along the Embarcadero, overlooking the bay. "Robert, I need your help," I said, keeping my voice low. "I think Rebecca has been hiding something for years." There was a pause on the line. "Michael, are you sure? That is a serious accusation." I sighed. "I will not accuse without evidence, but I need to know what is really happening." By the time I hung up, I had a plan forming. I returned home and walked into the study, where Rebecca's files, long neatly arranged, waited. I noticed a folder marked with last year's date. Normally, I would have ignored it, as she liked keeping her work separate, but today was different. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, revealing receipts, schedules, and emails that did not make sense. Flights to cities I had never been told about, reservations for meetings that did not exist, names I did not recognize. I made notes, taking photographs with my phone. Later, I confronted Daniel. "Son, can you tell me about Andrew? This name keeps appearing." Daniel's green eyes widened, and he shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, I was told never to ask," he admitted. I did not understand it either, until recently. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his honesty, and realized that for the first time in decades, someone in the family was acknowledging the truth. Then came a knock at the door. It was Rebecca's younger sister, Karen, who had always seemed distant, almost disinterested in family affairs. "Michael, I need to speak to you," she said, stepping inside and glancing at my notes. Her voice was urgent but soft. "I have known something for a long time. Rebecca has been leading 2 lives." I felt a jolt. 2 lives? What do you mean? She handed me a folder containing photographs and appointment confirmations. "Look at these. I tried to warn you before, but you never asked." My usual calm settled like a heavy cloak over me. "Thank you," I said quietly. I did not express anger. I did not show surprise. Instead, I methodically reviewed the documents, noting discrepancies and connections. Each page revealed a layer of deception I had not imagined. As I pieced the evidence together, I understood that a confrontation would not be impulsive, it would be strategic. And as the sun began to set over the bay, casting a warm orange glow across the city, I realized that everything was about to change. The ordinary patterns of our family life, the comfortable assumptions, the trust one had taken for granted, all of it was about to be redefined. I placed the folder on the desk and sat back, allowing myself a moment to breathe. Outside, the fog rolled in, and the lights of San Francisco blinked like distant stars. I knew that soon I would have to confront the truth, and that confrontation would not just expose secrets. It would redefine everything we thought we knew about our lives together. Something was coming, something unavoidable, and I was ready to meet it. That night, I sat alone in my study long after the city lights had faded into the fog. The folder Karen had given me remained open on the desk, and for the first time I began to understand that what hurt most was not the possibility that Rebecca had hidden something. It was the realization that the deception had been carefully maintained for years. The next morning, I decided to verify some of the information myself. One photograph showed Rebecca attending a private executive retreat in Napa Valley 18 months earlier. I remembered that week clearly because she had told me she was in Chicago negotiating a contract. I called the hotel listed on one of the receipts. I expected nothing. Instead, the receptionist politely confirmed that a corporate reservation under Rebecca's company name had indeed taken place on those dates. My chest tightened. Chicago had never happened. Later that afternoon, I met Robert at his office. He reviewed several financial records and slowly removed his glasses. "Michael, there is something else you should see." He turned his computer screen toward me. Several corporate documents listed an emergency contact. Not me. Not Daniel. The same name appeared again. Andrew Lawson. I stared at the screen. "How long?" I asked quietly. Robert checked the dates. "At least 7 years. 7 years. 7 years of meetings, holidays, anniversaries, and family dinners while another name sat where mine should have been." I left his office and drove home in silence. Daniel was waiting in the kitchen when I arrived. He looked nervous. "Dad, there is something I never told you." I sat down across from him. "Go ahead." He rubbed his hands together. "A few years ago, I attended one of Mom's company events. Someone introduced me as Andrew's son. I looked up sharply. "What did Mom say?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "She told me it was a misunderstanding. She always had an explanation." His words stayed with me. She always had an explanation. Suddenly, dozens of memories resurfaced. Every strange absence. Every canceled trip. Every event where I had somehow been excluded. Every uncomfortable moment that had been wrapped inside a convenient excuse. The lies had spread so naturally that even intelligent people accepted them without question. Friends, employees, business partners, even family members. They had all been given versions of reality tailored to what Rebecca wanted them to believe. That evening, I finally spoke to Karen again. "Why did you wait so long?" I asked. Her voice cracked slightly. "Because every time I questioned her, she convinced everyone that I was imagining things." "Michael, you were not the only one she manipulated." After the call ended, I walked into the living room and looked at the framed family photographs lining the shelves. For years, they had represented stability. Now they felt like props from a story I no longer understood. Then my phone buzzed. A message appeared from an unknown number. There was no greeting, no explanation, only a single photograph. Rebecca was standing beside Andrew outside a private event held just 3 nights earlier. They were smiling directly at the camera. Beneath the image was one sentence that made my hands go cold. "You deserve to know what they have been planning." In that moment, the last piece of certainty collapsed beneath me. For the next several days, I did something I never imagined I would have to do after more than 3 decades of marriage. I tried to save a relationship that suddenly felt as though it had been placed behind a wall I could not reach. I started with the simplest thing, a phone call. Rebecca did not answer. I left a calm voicemail. "Rebecca, it is Michael. I think we need to talk. Please call me when you have a moment." Hours passed, then a day, then 2. Nothing. On the 3rd day, I received a text message. It contained only 7 words. "Busy week. We will talk later." No explanation. No concern. No question about why I had called 3 times. I stared at the screen for a long time. The distance between us no longer felt accidental. It felt organized. I sent an email that evening. I kept it respectful. I told her I had questions. I told her I wanted honesty. I told her I was willing to listen. The next morning, I received an automated reply informing me that her executive office would review incoming correspondence. Executive office. Not my wife. Not Rebecca. An office. A system. A barrier. I began noticing that the same pattern existed everywhere. When I called the company, assistants intercepted the calls. When I sent messages, someone else responded. When I requested a meeting, I was told her calendar was full for the next several weeks. One afternoon, I drove to the corporate headquarters and asked politely if I could leave an envelope for her. The receptionist smiled professionally. "Of course, sir." 3 days later, the envelope was returned to my home unopened. No note, no explanation, just my own handwriting staring back at me. Daniel watched me place it on the kitchen counter. "She sent it back?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He looked away. "Dad, this is not normal." "No," I replied. "It is not." The most painful part was realizing how many people had accepted this arrangement as ordinary. Employees spoke about Rebecca as if her personal life existed in a separate universe. Longtime acquaintances avoided direct answers. Even family members seemed uncomfortable whenever I asked simple questions. One evening I called a couple we had vacation with for years. "Have you met Andrew?" I asked. Silence filled the line. Finally the husband answered. "Michael, maybe you should speak to Rebecca about that." "I am trying." Another silence followed. Then he changed the subject completely. After I ended the call, I sat alone in the dark living room. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner. Every sound felt louder than usual. Every memory felt heavier. What hurt was not one lie. It was the realization that an entire network of omissions, deflections, and carefully managed stories had been operating around me for years. Not everyone knew the full truth, but enough people knew pieces of it. Enough people had looked away. A week later, I mailed Rebecca a handwritten letter. 6 pages. No accusations. No anger. Just honesty. I told her I missed the woman I thought I knew. I told her I wanted answers. I told her there was still time to tell the truth. 10 days later, the letter arrived back in my mailbox. Unopened. Returned to sender. I carried it inside and placed it beside the unopened envelope from the company. Then beside the unanswered phone records. Then beside the printed emails. A small pile of failed attempts. Physical proof that every door had been quietly closed. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight. The house felt larger than it ever had before. Daniel had gone home. Karen had stopped calling for the evening. Even the city outside seemed unusually quiet. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt completely alone. And deep down, I started to fear that isolation was exactly what someone had wanted all along. I spent the following week moving through the house almost like a shadow, noticing things I had never paid attention to before. Every photograph on the wall, every award on the shelves, every little note pinned to the bulletin board felt like a reminder of a life I no longer fully understood. Daniel came by one afternoon and I asked him, "Do you ever feel like you are seeing only part of the story?" He paused, glancing down at his hands. "I do, Dad. I see it now. Mom's actions, the secrets. It does not make sense." I nodded slowly, absorbing his words. That night, I sat by the bay window, looking out over the Golden Gate Bridge as fog rolled in, blending the water and the sky into a gray blur. I realized how alone I truly was. I had invested decades into a marriage that had been built on careful half-truths and omissions. The man in the photograph, the emails, the trips, all pointed to a betrayal that was as systematic as it was devastating. I tried reaching out one more time. I called her office directly. The assistant answered professionally. "She is unavailable." I asked for her personally. "I am sorry, Mr. Carter. She will not be taking personal calls for the foreseeable future." The weight of the words hit me harder than anything I could have imagined. I tried to speak with friends and relatives, hoping to find some guidance, some support. Each conversation ended with polite evasion. "Michael, perhaps it is best to give her space," one colleague suggested. "I do not know what to tell you," Karen admitted reluctantly. "I tried to warn you before, but I never realized the extent." Even Daniel, normally a rock of reassurance, could only offer sympathy. "Dad, I am here, but I cannot change what has happened." Alone in my apartment, I wandered from room to room, touching objects that once carried warmth. The piano, silent for years, the kitchen where breakfasts had been shared, the hallway lined with photos of family vacations, all felt sterile and distant. I spoke out loud to no one. "Rebecca, what happened to us? Did we ever exist the way I thought we did?" No answer came, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. The realization settled in that the betrayal was not only about deception, it was about the complete restructuring of my world. Every effort to mend the connection had failed. Every call, every letter, every message returned nothing but walls and silence. Yet, in the middle of that deep, suffocating solitude, a tiny spark of awareness began to emerge. I understood that the power to change my situation had shifted. I could no longer rely on her to reveal the truth. I could no longer wait for reconciliation. And as the fog lifted briefly over the bay, I felt the faintest glimmer that this moment of despair might be the threshold for something different, something I could reclaim on my own. I decided that if the world would not hand me the truth, I would create my own path forward. Each morning, I walked into my study with the sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors and began planning meticulously. I revisited skills I had long neglected, drafting proposals and networking with old colleagues in San Francisco who had once trusted me with important projects. "Michael, are you really ready to start over?" Daniel asked one afternoon when he came by. I smiled faintly, not letting the tension show. "It is not starting over, son. It is stepping into the next chapter." I signed up for a small consulting firm that needed guidance in strategic management and governance. The first day, I arrived early, bringing folders of my past work, lessons learned, and ideas for growth. The office manager greeted me with surprise. "Mr. Carter, we were not expecting someone of your experience to apply." I nodded politely. "I am here to contribute where I can make a difference." That week, I had 2 meetings with potential clients who had always admired my previous work. They looked at my portfolio and asked, "Why have we not seen this before?" I answered simply, "I am ready now." Each phone call, each email, each small presentation reminded me that I was more than the isolation I had felt. I began teaching evening classes at a community center on business ethics and leadership, sharing stories from decades of experience, including mistakes and lessons learned, without revealing personal betrayals. Yet the students listened raptly, absorbing each word. Rebecca's absence, once a wound, became a backdrop to my renewed focus. Karen reached out briefly, curious about the changes I was making. "Michael, I never realized how strong you could be," she said, and I simply nodded, keeping my attention on building a life that was mine. Late one evening, as I returned from a networking dinner, I looked at the skyline and realized I had already begun constructing a life that did not depend on anyone's approval or attention. The phone rang. An investment firm from New York wanted to discuss a potential partnership. I listened carefully, asked questions, and scheduled a meeting. Each small victory, each acknowledgement of my skill and judgment, began to restore the sense of identity that had been eroded by secrecy and betrayal. Sitting in my apartment that night, I reviewed my calendar for the coming week. Meetings lined up with potential collaborators and students, and I felt a quiet satisfaction. The future seemed uncertain but promising, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a glimmer of hope that what had been lost could be rebuilt stronger than before, while still leaving unanswered questions about the secrets that Rebecca had carried, hinting that a revelation could emerge at any time. I arrived at the corporate headquarters wearing a tailored navy suit that I had not worn in years, the crisp lines and subtle sheen giving me a sense of presence I had long forgotten. My name tag read simply Michael Carter, Senior Consultant, but to me, it symbolized a reclaiming of authority and visibility in a world that had sidelined me. The receptionist looked up and smiled. "Mr. Carter, your office is ready," she said, and for the first time in weeks, I felt acknowledged. I walked down the hallway lined with glass panels and polished oak, the sound of my shoes echoing in a rhythm that matched my pulse. In the conference room, a group of young analysts had already gathered. "Good morning, Michael," said Sarah, the team lead, adjusting her blazer as she addressed me. "We are excited to hear your insights today." I nodded, allowing a quiet confidence to settle over me. "Thank you, Sarah. Let us start with the projections for Q3 and Q4. As I spoke, mapping out strategic plans and offering solutions grounded in decades of experience, I could see their eyes light up with recognition. They were not only listening, they were absorbing every word, nodding and taking notes, showing respect for what I brought to the table. Later, during a break, Daniel called. "Dad, you look different," he said, a hint of awe in his voice. I chuckled softly. "I suppose I do. It feels like the first time in years that my work is seen for what it is." Around midday, I was introduced to an executive from New York who extended a firm handshake. "Mr. Carter, your reputation precedes you. We are eager to see what you can do for our portfolio." I smiled, a measured smile that conveyed competence without arrogance. "I am here to contribute wherever I can make a difference," I replied. After the meeting, I walked past the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, feeling the sun glint off the steel of the bridge and the bay beyond. Each step reinforced a sense of control, a reclamation of power that had been quietly building since I accepted that the world would not hand me answers or respect. That evening, I returned to my apartment with a sense of purpose. I laid out the documents I had gathered over the past weeks and began drafting my next series of proposals, knowing that each completed page represented a step forward, a tangible assertion of my ability to shape my own path. As I looked out at the city lights stretching across the water, I felt a calm determination. The past had been a maze of betrayal and silence, but in this moment, with authority recognized and capability reaffirmed, I understood that the future was mine to define, and I could finally bridge the gap between the present and the moment that had first revealed the truth hidden in plain sight. I arrived at the hospital lobby with a sense of quiet determination, the polished floors reflecting my shoes as I walked past the automatic doors. The receptionist looked up and nodded. "Mr. Carter, Dr. Lewis is expecting you." I nodded and checked my watch. 10 minutes early. That was enough to observe without being noticed. The elevator hummed softly as I ascended to the private wing where the meeting was scheduled. I paused outside the door, adjusting my jacket and inhaling slowly, letting the cool air settle my thoughts. Inside, Rebecca was seated with her legal advisor and a hospital administrator. Her posture was perfect, composed, almost regal. I stayed in the shadow near the doorway for a moment, watching. She did not see me. "We will review the documents and decide the next steps," she said smoothly, her voice steady. I took a step forward, letting the sound of my presence carry. Her head turned slightly, and her eyes widened, though she quickly masked it with a small, controlled smile. "Michael," she said, the single word carrying a subtle tension. I nodded, not yet speaking. "Please have a seat," she gestured. I remained standing, observing the details. The file folders lined neatly, the nameplates on the table, the polished silver pen resting ready for signature. Every element signaled control, a meticulous orchestration of power. I finally spoke, my voice calm but firm. "Rebecca, I need to understand the full situation." She tilted her head slightly, choosing her words. "Michael, we are handling everything carefully. There is no reason for concern." I met her gaze steadily. "No reason for concern? Then explain why Andrew's name appears on documents you assured me were confidential." The room shifted subtly. The legal advisor cleared his throat. "Sir, that is not relevant to the current medical procedure," he said cautiously. I exhaled slowly. "Perhaps, but I am here now, and the truth is relevant to me." Rebecca leaned back slightly, maintaining her composure, yet there was a flicker of tension in her eyes. I noticed it. I turned my attention briefly to the hospital administrator. "Can you confirm these appointments?" The administrator hesitated, then nodded, acknowledging my implicit authority. I felt a subtle shift. The balance in the room had begun to tip. Rebecca's usual aura of unassailable control was no longer absolute. Each movement, each word was now under scrutiny. I took a step closer, letting the quiet power of observation underscore my presence. "Before we continue," I said softly, "I would like to review all relevant documents. No interruptions, no delays." There was a brief pause. Rebecca nodded subtly, her smile now measured, restrained, an acknowledgement that the dynamics had changed. I remained standing, calm and deliberate, aware that this moment marked the threshold between concealed truths and revelation. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. Everyone sensed it, even without words. And as I waited, letting the tension settle and the seconds stretch, I knew the next exchange would either confirm what I had long suspected or redefine everything I thought I knew about the life we had shared. The hospital administrator opened a secure folder and carefully slid several documents across the conference table. Nobody spoke for a moment. The room had become so quiet that I could hear the faint hum of the ventilation system above us. Rebecca kept her expression controlled, but her fingers tightened slightly around the silver pen resting beside her notebook. I noticed it immediately. Small details reveal far more than dramatic reactions ever do. "Please proceed," I said calmly. The administrator cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, these documents concern long-term executive directives, succession planning, and medical authorization records." I nodded. "Go on." He opened the first file. Over the past 6 years, multiple corporate and legal records were updated. Rebecca finally spoke. "Michael, there are explanations for all of this." I looked at her without anger. "Then let us hear them." The administrator continued reading. As each page turned, a pattern emerged. Different addresses, different emergency contacts, different personal representations depending on the audience involved. Not illegal, not criminal, but carefully constructed, carefully managed, carefully separated. The legal advisor shifted uncomfortably. Daniel, who had arrived moments earlier and now stood near the back wall, stared at the documents in disbelief. "Mom," he said quietly, "why would there be so many different versions of the same information?" Rebecca looked toward him. "Because my position required privacy." Daniel shook his head. "Privacy is one thing. This is something else." Nobody raised their voice. Nobody needed to. The truth was doing all the work on its own. I picked up one document and studied it. Then another. Then a third. Each one confirmed the same reality. For years, Rebecca had been presenting different narratives to different groups of people. Investors knew one version. Executives knew another. Family members knew another. Every circle received only the information she wanted them to see. "You spent years managing perceptions," I said softly. "You built separate worlds and expected them never to collide." Rebecca remained silent. For the first time since I had entered the room, she seemed unable to find the right response. The hospital administrator looked relieved that someone else had finally spoken the obvious truth aloud. Daniel stepped forward. "Dad," his voice cracked slightly. "How are you so calm?" I turned toward him. "Because once you understand what is happening, anger becomes unnecessary." The room fell silent again. Then something unexpected happened. The administrator opened the final folder. "There is one additional matter," he said. His voice sounded hesitant. He pushed a document toward me. I read the first page, then the second, then the third. My expression did not change, but inside, everything shifted. Daniel watched me carefully. "Dad, what is it?" I slowly placed the papers back on the table. Across from me, Rebecca's confidence disappeared completely for the first time. The legal advisor lowered his eyes. Nobody spoke. Finally, I looked directly at Rebecca and asked a single question. "When were you planning to tell me about this?" The shock that crossed her face answered before any words ever could. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the revelation settle around the room. Rebecca was quiet, her usual confidence replaced by a careful calculation in her eyes. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. "Dad, I cannot believe it," he said softly. I met his gaze calmly. "It is real, son. The documents confirm everything." Karen stood to the side, her hands folded, watching intently. "I told you this would happen, Michael," she said quietly, her voice tinged with relief and concern. I nodded. "Yes, Karen. Now everyone knows. And it changes how we move forward." I turned my attention back to Rebecca. "There are boundaries, Rebecca. Things that cannot be ignored any longer." She exhaled slowly. "Michael." I held up my hand to pause her. "I am listening, but we will proceed carefully. Your explanations will not undo the facts presented here." I gestured to the stack of documents. "Everyone in this room sees the truth now. No more confusion, no more partial versions. The decisions you made are out in the open." The legal advisor adjusted his papers and cleared his throat. "This will require formal acknowledgement and careful documentation," he said, addressing the room. I nodded in agreement. "Of course, but the principle remains the same. Honesty first, clarity second." Daniel stepped closer, his voice steadier now. "Dad, what do we do next?" I looked at him and then at Rebecca, my tone firm but measured. "We respect the facts. We establish new lines and ensure no one can manipulate the story again. That begins with recognition and careful boundaries." Rebecca's lips pressed into a thin line. She finally said, "I understand." I nodded once, slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle over all of us. The room was silent for a moment, each person processing what had just been laid bare. Then I spoke again, softer this time. "This does not erase the past, but it defines what comes next. And from here, every action is intentional." The tension was palpable, yet controlled. Everyone was aware that the dynamics had shifted irrevocably. Even in quiet compliance, the unspoken acknowledgement was clear. The balance of power had moved, and I would not be sidelined again. I allowed the pause to linger, letting it speak more than any argument ever could. Daniel exhaled, almost imperceptibly, and Karen gave a small, reassuring nod. Rebecca remained seated, silent, absorbing the new reality. The documents had spoken, and in their wake, a clear structure had emerged, one that respected truth and set boundaries. Yet, even as calmness returned to the room, an undercurrent remained, a subtle tension, a sense that while the immediate confrontation was resolved, the emotional reckoning was far from over, leaving us all aware that the story's final chapter had yet to be written. I wake up each morning now with a quiet clarity. The apartment is brighter, the sunlight falling across the wooden floorboards where I used to pace in confusion now feels like a reminder of the choices I can make for myself. I have rebuilt routines that honor my own boundaries. My work is respected, and the space around me is mine. The documents, the meetings, the betrayals, they no longer define me. They serve as lessons. I have learned that self-respect and awareness are shields against deception, and that setting clear boundaries does not make one cruel. It makes one whole. To anyone watching who has felt overlooked, betrayed, or silenced, I want to say, trust your instincts, protect your emotional and financial well-being, and remember that your worth is never determined by another's actions. The sun rises over the San Francisco Bay as I place a small potted succulent on the windowsill, a simple symbol of life, resilience, and quiet growth. I am Michael Carter, 70 years old, and the lesson I want to share with you is, true strength comes from acknowledging truth and reclaiming your life. Each day now holds intentional choices, calm decisions, and a sense of agency I had once thought impossible. As I sip my coffee and watch the waves shimmer, I think of the stories yet to be told, the lives quietly rebuilding themselves in homes across the world, and the potential for transformation that lies in patience, reflection, and courage. Remember that no matter the pain of betrayal or the weight of isolation, life continues to offer opportunities to rise. The next chapters in my journey, and in countless others like mine, await, and I hope you will stay with me to witness the resilience of the human spirit, discover lessons hidden in adversity, and see how ordinary moments can become extraordinary as we reclaim our own paths. Thank you for allowing me to share this story, for listening, and for being present in these moments of truth and reflection. Your attention honors not only my experience, but the quiet courage within us all.